how do you design a look for a fashion show? And how do you get it done on the day? Who gives you the brief and how? What does the design process look like? How do you know what direction to take? Who's going to give you the brief? Where do you get the inspiration from? If you're a hair director for a fashion show, you're going to have 3 completely different jobs to do concurrently. Number 1 is the creative. That's coming up with a look that's on brand, on brief, and right for the whole vibe of the show. The second part is the leadership or team leadership, which is getting a team of anywhere from 5 to 50 hairdressers that you don't regularly work with to learn the look and execute it as if you'd done it yourself on multiple different heads of hair in a limited time. And with all the hurdles and hiccups and backstage curveballs that can happen, like, I don't know, models running late or turning up with oil or grease in their hair from an earlier show, and all of that stuff that happens. And you got to do it all on time so you never ever hold up the show. And the third part is media spokesperson, which is having the time, the headspace and the energy to speak to the media in the midst of the chaos and represent yourself, the brand and your sponsors in a way that adds value. In this session, we'll focus on the first part, the creative. We'll talk about different ways that you'll be briefed. We'll look at the process for coming up with the look or multiple looks if there happen to be them. We'll talk about 3 specific things you need to consider for the hair when interpreting a brief for Runway that are different to doing photographic hair or salon hair, and how the process of the hair test works, the logistics, if you know what I mean. So for me personally, the creative part of doing hair for a fashion show is actually probably my favorite thing in the world to do. I kind of like to think of the whole process a bit like playing in a band and coming up with a new song. And the hair to me is like the rhythm section, the bass and the drums. You know, in a song without bass and drums, you can still have a perfectly good song. But with those things, with a rhythm section to support and uplift the whole song, it can take everything to another level. And like drums and bass in a song, hair in a fashion show can make the show or break it. If you listen to a song and you notice the bass and drums and you're not a drummer or a bass player, it's either so amazing that it deserves the spotlight over and above the vocals and melody, or it was a poor choice. It doesn't fit, it's incongruous, and it kind of blows the whole experience, much like hair in a fashion show, right? So before we dig into the creating part, let's take a look at the kind of logistics, the who, what, where, etc. So that we can set the scene for how the designing of the look for a show happens. So there's a bunch of main players that you're going to deal with for a show. Of course, there's the designer, there's usually a creative director, there's a show stylist, a casting director, there's a hair director, obviously, a makeup director, and a PR agency. Now, each of these players have their own kind of entourage, their agents, teams, assistants, support staff, sponsors, and so on. But the core team, the main people you need to create with, are the designer, the creative director, the stylist, and the makeup artist. You're going to be the band that creates the magic. How you end up getting booked as a hair director is, it'll vary. It'll depend on the relationships you have with the other creatives. More and more these days, it's influenced by brand sponsorships from hair companies. But once you're booked and confirmed, then it's time for the hair test or the hair trial. That usually happens a week or so before the show, but depending on how busy you guys are, like you and all the other creatives during Fashion Week, sometimes it happens that the hair tests have to happen the night before, or even, heaven forbid, on the day of the show. Hell, I've even done them at the show after call time. It's definitely not ideal. Now, the hair test or the hair trial is where you will discuss the brief. You'll see the collection, you'll design the look, you'll document the look and the process required to create it. When you're designing the look, there's 2 major design considerations to keep in mind. The first one is the character. Who is the character? If you go back to the lesson on the photo shoot section about interpreting the brief, you'll remember we talked a lot about characters and archetypes, or the archetype of the character that we're trying to create with the hair. And the hair plays a big part in the identity of character, and it'll help tell the story of the show and solidify the identity that the brand is trying to express through this particular show. So archetypes or character. And the second major design consideration is the three key elements of great hair: silhouette, perimeter, and texture. However, you need to view these in the context of a show. And what I mean by that is that when you think about hair in a photographic setting, it's only ever going to be seen in 2D. But in a show, it's going to be seen from three main angles that you need to consider. It's going to be seen from the front, particularly at the entrance or the first entrance when they first appear at the end of the runway. And at the end of the runway when they're being photographed by the press in the pit. It's going to be seen from the side, so particularly by the front row, who are going to be looking up and down at the models as they strut past. And then, of course, it's going to be seen from the back as they turn and return and exit. There's kind of a third design consideration that I think of as a nice to have more than a must have. And that's the idea that the hairstyle you design should be like immediately recognizable as something people understand, but at the same time it's got to have some kind of design feature or twist, not like a literal twist, but kind of a twist that makes it feel new. It's like if you think about hearing a pop song for the first time. When you hear a new song, there's always something about it that sounds familiar, yet there's some new hook or something that's totally intriguing and makes you want to listen to it again. So if you can manage this little nice to have, it's going to give you good content for when you talk to the media about the hair. And we'll talk about that more in the lesson on talking to the media. So let's look at how the hair test usually rolls. So how it goes is most of the time it's going to happen at the designer's showroom, and unless it's Dolce & Gabbana, who've got like a full-blown salon set up in their workroom, because I can't remember which one, but one of them actually used to be a hairdresser. They've got a full-on salon set up there, but unless it's there, then it's probably going to be pretty makeshift, and you're going to have to work around a working fashion showroom. You need to allow at least 3 hours. Usually it's more like 5 hours. One time for McQueen, we were there for like 14 hours working on the test, 5 of us. Usually it starts with all the usual niceties, you know, the kisses, hello, meet and greet, all of that stuff. You've got to set up your gear. And then you get into the having a chat or the consultation. You'll talk about the overall show concept, look at the clothes. And when I'm looking at the clothes, I always like to ask about the genesis of the collection. Where did it come from? Who was the muse, if there was one? What inspired it? What's the story? What's it all about? I also like to ask for any pictures of hair that the designers and the creatives love, and hair that they hate. And I try to listen for key words that evoke energy or emotion. You want to listen for when they feel really strongly one way or the other, so that you can kind of use that as a parameter to create. Because if they're just neutral about everything, it can be hard to know when you're on the right track. You want to listen for like absolute kind of yes moments or no moments in the initial chat, and that allows you to put those pegs in the ground for your creative process. Generally speaking, the designer or the stylist or the PR, whoever, will have organised a model or two, sometimes 3 or more for the test. Sometimes people are there having fittings. And then you and makeup will then go about creating. So you'll create a look. Once you've created the look, you'll document it front, side and back. What I like to do is find some good light in a blank wall, because maybe this might be the look for the show. And if it is, then you'll need these pictures for when you brief your team. So make sure you photograph every look nicely. Makeup does their thing, and then together everyone sits back and sort of does an assessment and looks at the look as a whole. Sometimes I'll try it with some clothes. The model might walk a little bit. If you can, you should get some video of the model walking, but remember, don't post it on social until after the show has walked. And then maybe you'll try a completely different idea, or just a slight variation on the look, or maybe you'll actually all love what you did and you'll agree this is it, that's the show look. It is different every show and every designer, and this hair test, that's when you should experiment and really challenge your ideas and just not be satisfied with your first thoughts or your first creation. One thing I like to do is to think, what would be the antithesis or the complete opposite of what seems obvious for this show? How can we juxtapose all the elements? In other words, you know, can we do something like a tough, narrow look with a floral gown and pretty makeup? Or could we do a luxe, polished, glamorous look with raw makeup? How can we mix and match the elements to create visual tension? So to give you some examples, at the Romance Was Born show for Australian Fashion Week 2021, these clothes were bright with incredible silhouettes and amazing patterns and this crazy over-the-top makeup. And I wanted to make it feel a little more grown up and serious by giving the models a tough, slightly disheveled, lived-in, slicked-back, wet look that was cinched in tight at the nape. During the hair test, we played with a bunch of ideas, including the idea of a more 60s vibe, but it felt too derivative of Prada when it was all put together, so we decided to go back to the tough wet look, even though we all loved the look. For this Magdalena Walewska show, the collection was based around this macrame motif from her childhood, paired with pops of neon. We wanted to somehow reference this in the hair and then juxtapose the playfulness with a really strict, almost uptight feel. I used a geometric pattern and a 2-strand braid to create this macrame motif that sat super tight to the head and gave the models an almost alien look. It actually took me, I think, nearly 2 days to come up with this final look and figure out how to replicate it. It was so mathematical. At the Stolen Girlfriends Club show, we wanted these models to feel as if they'd been out partying all night listening to 80s music. So I used a pure oil to give the hair a lived-in kind of greasy texture, tongued a bit of 80s curl in there, then pulled it into this high top knot, nice and forward so it didn't feel too kind of now, and then put bright scrunchies in the hair that we made out of fabric from the collection so that kind of went through. This is one of my favorites, this Akira show. There was this idea that we'd try to ground the collection, which had these incredible prints and beautiful flowing fabrics by the models all wearing sneakers. And this really made us think about early 80s Brooklyn hip hop. And I imagined this kind of hat hair crossed with this Belgian design aesthetic. I used a finger wave method to mold the hair flat and tight to the head with a really square perimeter. And then everyone had this little kind of fucked up edge just on one corner. When Akira saw it, he was like, I like it. I like it a lot. It looks like you made a mistake, but intentionally. And once you've created the look, you're going to document it with photos, you're going to write down all the products and techniques you used, and then you need to switch into team leader mode. Now we'll talk all about team leader mode in the next lesson. See you in there.